These days, women are able to succeed in more and more fields that were previously dominated by men. Unfortunately, some of these industries carry a lot of danger for women. Fishing vessels can be harsh conditions in the best situations, but for women, being a vast minority and being isolated out at sea, this can create a perfect storm for becoming a victim. The more light shed on these situations, the more change can come to make the fishing industry more safe. In this episode, we will be discussing assaults on fishing vessels.
Hello, thank you so much for jumping back into the abyss with us today. My name is Hallie.
And I'm Brittany.
And we're excited to be able to cover this topic with you. It's something that is near and dear to our hearts. We both have worked in the scientific community, and we even studied for a chunk of time in Alaska where a lot of this stuff goes down. So it's very important to us to cover this topic, and we're super excited to share it with you. If you like what you hear on our podcast, go ahead and give it a like, share it, follow us, reach out to us, let us know your feedback. We really love to hear from you. Also, if you are wanting to support us with the production of this podcast, you can join our Patreon where you would pay $2 every month just to keep us up and going. We would really appreciate it, and we have a lot more in store for Patreon, so if we can get some people on it now, we'll be able to add more tiers where we can show you guys more and more content to just feed your true crime hunger. Also, at the end of every episode, make sure you stay tuned for bloopers because sometimes we mess up or we're a little bit goofy here and there, so we like to add those at the end to kind of lighten the mood. And when you're listening to the episode, don't be afraid to go on to theabysspod.com where you can find all of our show notes, pictures, links, anything that you might want to have for the case to further your research or just to have clarification on any information.
So let's jump into the abyss. The Anchorage Daily News and ProPublica Investigative Journal state that, quote, Alaska has the highest rate of sexual assault in the nation, 4 times the national average, end quote. They state this problem is so bad that, quote, about 1/3 of women in Alaska have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, end quote. The Alaska State Commission for Human Rights said complaints about sexual assault in the fishing industry are not substantially different than other rates of reports, but because Alaska is such an incredible place for science, particularly marine science, these numbers naturally impact women in these fields a lot. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, hires people as observers, and these act as at-sea monitors to go on commercial fishing vessels to ensure federal fishing regulations are being followed, but unfortunately this creates a primed environment for women to experience harassment and sexual assaults. They go out to sea and they're isolated and there's not a lot of people around, so they have to really rely on the crew and kind of a small group of people. So if there's any bad eggs in that group, then they're really vulnerable. There are approximately 350 observers at any one time in Alaska, and about half of these are women. The boats are almost exclusively dominated by men, and while some vessels make an effort to be welcoming to everyone, many are a really hostile place for women, just right off the bat. One observer, Alex Ravello, told KTOO that some boats welcomed women, while on others she would see pornography laying around and would experience inappropriate comments and teasing. She recalled one situation in which a man blocked her from exiting a room to prevent her from leaving, but she shoved past him and got away. Many assaults don't get reported, and there are lots of reasons for this. Some women don't clearly know the line between sexual assault and just kind of joking around. And I think this is common for a lot of women just in general, that we've been so conditioned to kind of accept teasing and harassment as just a normal part of life that it's hard to sometimes differentiate. Especially in male-dominated fields, women are often expected to withstand a lot of harassment, and then they're kind of dismissed for being overdramatic if they report it or bring it up.
Which I feel like most women and even men have been in that position where someone might be joking with you and you're like, oh, that's not really funny. And then they're like, oh, whoa, I was just kidding. And you're like, okay, not really funny though.
Yeah, and especially like we said, with the boats, they're isolated, they're out in a vulnerable position anyway. So when someone starts harassing you or making sexual jokes or things like that, it can be really frightening for the person receiving it. And sometimes the person doing the teasing doesn't really understand the magnitude of what they're doing, but a lot of times they do it to actively make someone uncomfortable, and that, like, that's the purpose.
Yeah, and to like get a reaction. And then when someone may respond offended or not really liking the joke, they may say, oh, well, like, you can't take a joke.
Yeah.
We know not to mess around with you, yada, yada, yada.
And it's not just jokes, it's inappropriate touching or, you know, messing with their stuff or making repeated innuendos.
Or blocking her in a room.
Yeah. So it can mean a lot of things. And many women are scared of the backlash they'd receive by reporting it, especially in fields where it's kind of hard to break into. And science is definitely one of those where it can be really hard to even get into the industry, even if you have the education and everything, experience and all of that. It can be hard to break into it. So once you get into it, sometimes women don't want to put that at risk by reporting a superior, not knowing how it's going to go, if they'll be believed or if it'll blow back in their faces.
And this probably happened a lot, just the same, whenever women started being allowed to join the military.
And the backlash can come from families and communities, in addition to harming their career and potential advancement and things like that. For some women, they don't report because they don't think anything would come of it, even if they did report it. So again, it might be more trouble than it's worth in their minds, because a lot of times women are kind of dismissed or not believed with things like that. Or if there's not enough evidence, they might just be dismissed. And then again, it puts them in a bad spot.
Yeah, and the statistics that we talked about before, where 1 in 3 women experience sexual violence in Alaska in their lifetime, that's just the reported one. So that just shows you we don't even really know the extent of how bad it is.
NOAA has tried to adjust their training to make people understand the problem and help victims to be more comfortable and confident in reporting. But this training only goes as far as people working on the boats are willing to go, because once they're out of direct view of authority, it's a lot harder to hold them accountable. And if they're not good people to begin with, honestly, then those rules don't really mean anything. We saw that a lot with the Laura McCluskey case, where it's a lot of regulations and rules and trainings, but like we said in that case, you really can't train someone to be a good person. So it's hard to hold them accountable once they're out of the direct purview of the authorities. Hallie and I both have marine biology backgrounds, and like she said, we lived in Alaska for a while in college. And in Homer, where we lived, there were relatively few reports, but it's still unnerving to us researching this case to know how many women in similar positions go through these horrible things and how close we are to that industry.
Going on about how these women might have been treated or reacted to on the boats, one woman mentioned that a potential boss or a captain would mention to her that he was married or something like that, as if it was necessary for her to know that information. Or they would say that they didn't want a deckhand, but they wanted a girlfriend instead. So just comments like that are considered a form of harassment.
And that really puts a lot of women in a fearful position when that's kind of your initial experience with it, because those comments can seem kind of harmless if you put them in like a joking light, but they can also be really aggressive. And if you are in that situation where you're going to be alone with these people for a long period of time, and you know that they kind of go off the bat starting with that kind of thing, it can be really scary.
Due to the harassment, some women say that they hesitate to even recommend other women for the positions because they don't want to be responsible for putting them in a dangerous situation. To combat these problems, some fishermen will just not hire women in order to protect their crew from possible harassment allegations. But this in return just prevents women from having the same opportunities to work in the field as men do. In fact, some of the fishermen's wives either don't support or completely refuse for the men to have women working on their boats because they fear infidelity.
Which then you just need to throw out the whole husband if you think that he's going to do that just because a woman is around him.
Honestly, if you can't trust your husband to be on a boat for a week and have one woman on the crew, there's a problem. To further the issue, when women are sexually assaulted or harassed on a boat, they are trapped on board with their perpetrator for an extended period of time with little to no possibility of escape. This also brings a problem because some people are victim blamed. They say that the women put themselves in these situations while being aware of the dangers. But I'm sorry, this just doesn't fly with me. This is like telling a woman that it's her fault that she was raped because she wore a bathing suit to the beach. That's just ludicrous to me. Maybe the men that are harassing and sexually assaulting these women on the boats should be decent human beings and learn some respect. Just because she cares about the ocean and is trying to make money doing a job that she loves does not mean she is willingly putting herself in a situation to be sexually harassed or assaulted. That's just absurd.
Yeah, going to work and being a scientist is not an invitation for harassment or assault.
As for smaller fishing vessels, they don't always have harassment policies because they don't believe it is a large problem on their boats, because these smaller fishing vessels may only have about 4 crew members. Personally, I believe that it should just be posted like choking signs in a restaurant. Like being able to give the Heimlich, you should be able to report sexual assault. Every group, small or large, should have this information for their workers. They should have signs posted. They should enforce actions against sexual harassment and assault, rather than just saying they don't have that problem, because it can happen with just one crew member on the boat. They should also note on these posters what to do if you witness sexual assault or harassment occurring to someone else.
One specific instance of this kind of thing is the story of Carla Dalton. In 1990, she was 28 years old and hired on as a new member on the commercial fishing vessel, the Dorothy L, off of San Francisco. Things quickly went bad for Carla. The 49-year-old boat captain, Paul Batsford, began beating her and held her captive. He threatened her with a .22 caliber rifle and put her through a nightmare until on May 8, 1990, she made her escape by jumping 40 feet from the deck of the ship. She was luckily able to flag down another fishing vessel passing through and contact help. Paul Batsford was arrested and charged with felony assault and felony false imprisonment, but these charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence. Municipal Judge Robert Atack was quoted in a Los Angeles Times article as saying, quote, "His actions, while outrageous, were not felonious," end quote. Which, what? He held her captive and beat her. Both of those things are pretty serious.
Not to mention that he threatened her with a gun.
I feel like anyone that's beaten and held hostage and threatened with a gun would feel kind of differently, but whatever. He basically suggested she jumped 40 feet into the water, not even knowing if she could get help for no reason, which is pretty absurd. Assistant DA Christine McGuire still filed a misdemeanor charge against Paul Batsford for battery and brandishing a weapon.
Another case where this occurred was by a man named Richard Wetherell. He was age 61 and he was the captain of a commercial fishing vessel called FV Jessica and Susan in Rhode Island. He had 2 cases of assault brought up against him by 2 women who had been on his boat working at different times. And when each woman was on the boat, they were the only females present. In 2012, Richard pled guilty to forcible assault, as well as intimidation and interference of the work of 2 women on his ship as observers and at-sea monitors. Richard was quoted in the U.S. versus Wetherell file saying that, quote, "It was not like how they said it was at all," end quote. He also said that he was 100% guilty of 20% of what the women said. That seems kind of like you're deferring, really admitting what happened. And what 20% then are you guilty of if you're guilty of 20%? You know, was it the assault part?
Yeah, that's such a strange thing to say.
Richard said that this whole case was just too much to handle and that he really just wanted it all to be over. Yeah.
Poor baby.
Brittany's doing the boo-hoo sign. His punishment was 6 months in prison with a year of supervision afterwards and 2 $100,000 fines for each of the women that were assaulted.
In yet another case, a 39-year-old man named Brandon Vanderplug from Winchester Bay, Oregon, sexually assaulted his girlfriend on a fishing vessel on August 16, 2018. The Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon, said, quote, "The victim reported that Vanderplug had assaulted her on several occasions after leaving Winchester Bay. She specifically reported that Vanderplug held her down, punched her repeatedly in the face, headbutted her in the nose, and slammed her head down on a toolbox. The assault resulted in a 3-inch laceration on her right cheek, a depressed nasal fracture, multiple contusions to her knees and arms, and cervical strain, end quote. The U.S. Coast Guard was called and was able to locate the boat and send a helicopter. When they arrived, they smelled alcohol, and it was immediately apparent that Brandon was heavily intoxicated. Upon testing, they found he had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.183. It is illegal to operate a vessel with a BAC of over 0.04, so boy was
toasted.
Yeah. On September 30th, Brandon pled guilty to both the assault and operating a vessel under the influence of alcohol and agreed to pay restitution to his victim.
And lastly, for some cases that we'll talk about, are posts from ProRepublica and the Anchorage Daily News, where they work together to provide a safe place for survivors of sexual assault in Alaska to post their stories and raise awareness about the issue in the state. They have accumulated a bunch of survivor stories, and if you have a story from Alaska where you have been assaulted yourself and you would like to share that, we will have a link on our website for you to submit it. We are going to talk about 2 cases that they addressed in regards to sexual assault on fishing vessels specifically, but if you decide to go post your story, it can be under any circumstance as long as it's in Alaska. The first case is from a person that submitted under the name EK. In 2017, EK was hired on a tug and barge operation. As she entered the boat, she saw that all the men on the boat had a room with a door that locked. However, they told her that her space was underneath the stairs with nothing but a curtain for protection. She doesn't go into detail about her assaults since it is currently an open investigation, but she does say that she still has PTSD from what she endured. In another submission, a woman posted her story by the name of Kathleen. In August 2013, Kathleen boarded a fishing vessel with a captain who was as old as her father in Prince William Sound, Alaska. I am unsure of why she was hired on this boat, but it was definitely there for a work-related position, either an observer or at-sea monitor or maybe just deckhand, something like that. Shortly into the start of the trip, the captain tried to feel her up, and she immediately shot down his actions and told him that she had a boyfriend at home and was only on the boat for work. According to the Anchorage Daily News, he then said, quote, "What happens on the boat stays on the boat," end quote. After an exhausting initial 5 hours on the boat, working her butt off, Kathleen went to her bunk and crawled into her sleeping bag trying to get some rest. The captain then appeared above her bunk and attacked her. She pulled out a 2.5-inch blade to defend herself, but the captain was able to wrestle it out of her hands. He then proceeded to rape her and slept next to her in the bunk for the remainder of the night. Again, the Anchorage Daily News quoted him, telling her, quote, "You're mine for the week," end quote. The following morning, Kathleen asked him to take her back to shore, but he refused and told her they had way too much work to get done. Immediately after returning to land, though, she went to her boyfriend, told him everything, and they went to the Alaska State Troopers to report the sexual assault that she had endured. The Alaska State Troopers conducted a sexual assault exam on Kathleen, and they told her that unless they had the captain confessing on a recording, then he would not be charged. Since Kathleen had not been paid by the captain for work that she did that week, she decided that this would be a perfect opportunity to record his confession. At the meeting, he only gave her $300 out of the $500 that he was supposed to provide for her because she supposedly didn't work hard enough on the boat that week. While wearing the mic, she was able to get him to say that he made a mistake, but it wasn't enough for police to charge him, and the case was ultimately dropped. In addition, since Kathleen willingly went onto the boat to work for a week, the police couldn't charge him with kidnapping either, even though she asked to be returned to shore and he refused.
Which doesn't make any sense to me at all, because you can be held hostage in your own home. You can be held hostage anywhere. Even if you agreed to go there initially, if they don't let you leave, that's the crime. Not getting there, but not being able to leave when you want to.
At a later time, other women came forward about being sexually assaulted by the same man, which made it possible to open up an investigation against him, even though he denies having non-consensual sex with anyone.
I'm sure he does. One organization trying to fight this situation is the Strength of Tides movement, started by Elma Burnham in 2017. This movement asked local fishermen and boat captains to sign a pledge to have zero tolerance for sexual assault and harassment. By the 2-year mark, the movement had accumulated 300 signatures, and it's the hope of the organizers that these pledges can translate into written policy that will be implemented to make vessels safer. Elma also wants it to be used by women who want to work in the field so they can choose vessels based on who signed the pledge and who is showing that they're committed to improving the situation. This is good for raising awareness, and smaller fishing groups appreciated that the pledge showed their commitment to safety without a lot of red tape that they had to go through. There's also a Facebook group called Chicks Who Fish that aims to bring women in the fishing industry together. They have made strides in things like working with Grundens to create gear that accommodates women, because not having proper gear is another barrier women experience when getting into male-dominated fields. They also have been working to create a professional nonprofit organization called the Women's Commercial Fisheries Alliance to help women in the industry. We also wanted to give 2 little disclaimers here. One, we're obviously not in any way saying that every fisherman or every fishing vessel is dangerous or that every woman will experience that in the field. And also, we're not saying that all victims are female. There's definitely men that experience harassment and assault on fishing vessels and other industries like that too. So we just wanted to throw that out there, that we're not making those claims at all.
During 2019, NOAA had to file 2 separate notices of violation and assessment against 2 individuals for sexual assault and harassment of an observer on their boats. They charged one person $30,000 and the other $55,000. Furthermore, people who commit sexual harassment or assault are now eligible for up to 6 months in prison and a $130,000 fine. Some people also have started trying to make things more accessible for females in the fishing industry. This varies between boat crews making spaces more welcoming and comfortable for women to organizations like the Salmon Sisters who are making more gear for females. If you know someone or you yourself have been sexually assaulted or harassed while working in the fishing industry, you can call the NOAA Enforcement Hotline at 800-853-1964. We'll have that number on our website also for you to go and click there if you would like.
Obviously, the safety of women on fishing vessels is extremely important, so the question stands, how are we all going to do our part to protect women under these circumstances?
Thanks for diving into the abyss with us.
Oh, our laugh just sounded so similar. Oh no. We are Linda.
To further.
On the commercial fishing.
Ready?
Attack.
Robert, attack. Yeah. God.
Yeah, he was
toasted.
I don't know.
Some people have also started trying to thank people.
You can do it.